Welcome to the Rewilded Human podcast, where Dr. Lucille and Lynn will tackle your most difficult and intimate questions with candor, tough love, and a little dash of humor. In today's episode,
some other things to look for is that people pleasing, thinking that others' needs are more important than your own. So you're constantly trying to make sure everybody's okay, avoid conflict at all costs. But meanwhile, you have this inner turmoil in yourself and you're exhausted trying to make sure everyone's energy is in a good place, but you're completely drained.
And I think that you're very wise to point out that we're so conditioned to be in that role that we enter into it and we slide into it without even being consciously aware of what we're doing. And we're constantly running on that hamster wheel of, I just got to do it better. I'm not doing it well enough. I just got to do it better. Got to do it better.
But the awareness was the game changer that I'm like, oh my gosh, that's not true. Like I lived my whole life thinking this is gospel. And when I realized that that's not true and I don't have to live with that story anymore, that was the most liberating thing in my life. And it gave me a whole new path of seeing life differently.
Welcome, everybody, to the Rewilded Human Podcast, episode number 52. I am Dr. Lucille, and I am a holistic psychiatrist, psychotherapist, and this is my beautiful co-host, Lynn Hardy, who's actually the brains behind our podcast. She is a clinical nutritionist and a naturopath. And today we have the exquisite pleasure of having a guest, Dr. Kelly Kessler. You're going to really enjoy this because you, our listeners, are mostly women. Maybe men can relate to this topic, but Kelly's expertise is in the area of self-abandonment. So our episode is entitled Self-Abandonment: The Hidden Impact on Your Health, which I think is actually an epidemic among women. Anyway, let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Kessler. She's a licensed physical therapist, transformation coach. She's the host of the globally ranked podcast Rewiring Health.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah, kind of similar to our title.
Yes.
The owner of Optimal You Health and Wellness LLC, and a mom of two boys. I don't know how you do all this, Kelly. You have to tell us.
I don't either.
Kelly helps high-achieving women recognize and heal from dysfunctional patterns of abandoning themselves and feeling unrelenting stress. Through nervous system regulation and subconscious mind reprogramming, Kelly guides her clients through a personal transformation to step into their own power, reclaim their worth, and honor their health and inner peace. Wow. Isn't that what we all need? Isn't that what we all need, Aylin?
Well, definitely. Welcome, Dr. Kelly. So nice to have you on our podcast. We are so excited to hear everything that you have to share with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so looking forward to this.
Me too.
So Kelly, that was a very, very impressive bio, and I'm really curious as to how you got into this work. Can you tell us about your background?
Yeah, so it was a very much a roundabout way of getting to this place, but it really has just been years of me abandoning myself and realizing that I didn't want to live like this anymore. And to kind of take it back just a little bit, I mean, I didn't even realize I was doing this in the process because I've always been a high achiever. I've always been someone who's very goal oriented. I now realize I was validating my worth through external achievement, through external praise and everything. And so I became just almost like addicted to this. Like I have to achieve more to fill my cup. And I realized now, but didn't realize at the time that like my cup was so empty from within, and I was just burning the candle at both ends, draining myself, exhausted, and thinking that this is the only way. And that, you know, one day things will settle down, then everything will be much easier for me. And through my journey, I abandoned myself in my late 20s or early 20s rather. And in that pursuit of seeking that external validation, external achievement, I experienced an eating disorder for several years, completely impacted my health. After that, I stopped the eating disorder behaviors, but I still dealt with a lot of these emotions of feeling like I'm not enough, and then experienced chronic back pain for several years. Went on and tried to do all the things, all the modalities to heal myself through that, thinking that, well, go to PT school, learn all the things, still dealt with a lot of the same issues. And everything just came to a head several years ago when I had my first son. We were building our house. We were the general contractors. I was working full time, an hour away, 5 days a week. What could have gone wrong went wrong in the house. We were spending far more money than we anticipated. I mean, it was just like the absolute perfect storm. And then the pandemic hit. And I remember just having this moment. I was sitting on the floor looking at my 9-month-old son, and I'm like, I don't even think I was here. I'm looking at him. He's 9 months old, and I'm like, I've been physically here, but I have not been here. And it crushed me, because you always hear how precious these moments are and how fleeting they are. And I had been living like this my whole life, but it was at this moment when I had my child, it's like, I can't live like this anymore. Made the decision that I don't know how I'm going to get out of this hole that I'm in right now, but I'm going to figure out a way. And so just started taking the breadcrumbs from then and started to really prioritize myself in that moment and just seek out sources to fill my own cup for once in my life without seeking things outside myself.
Oh, that's amazing. I think a lot of women can really relate with that, because I think we've all had those times where, we just allowed everything to come crashing down on us until we realized that we had to dig ourselves out of the hole. So I appreciate your origin story. It's quite amazing.
I'm sure, yes, absolutely. Very, very relatable. Absolutely. I'm sure for a lot of women.
So for the women out there who think they might be in that state, can you tell us a little bit more about what self-abandonment is, and how would a woman know that she's crossed the threshold into that state?
Yeah, so it can take on a lot of forms. So some things that to look for me, it was that I deal with perfectionism. So seeking something out that was unobtainable. So I was constantly feeling like no matter what I did, no matter how hard I worked, it was never going to be enough. And I was not enough. And so if you feel that theme in your life of feeling like everything has to be perfect, and when it's not, you focus on the one little thing that didn't go perfect rather than focusing on all the things that went well. That's part of that, where we abandon ourselves in the moment. It's just a little part of it. But some other things to look for is that people pleasing, thinking that others' needs are more important than your own. So you're constantly trying to make sure everybody's okay, avoid conflict at all costs. But meanwhile, you have this inner turmoil in yourself, and you're exhausted trying to make sure everyone's energy is in a good place, but you're completely drained. Another way we do that is self-care, where we make our self-care last. So we make sure everything's okay. And like, when I have time at the end of the day, then I'll fit it in somehow. It never happens. And then you're like, okay, I'll figure out my schedule. I'll get the self-care. I'll go to the gym, or I'll do some yoga. And then you're just waiting for that opportune moment. And again, it never happens, because life will always fill those gaps with something else, especially when you think they're more important than yourself. So that's another way we do that. That self-criticism, feeling like we're just coming down on ourselves. No matter what we do, we're focused on the negative, thinking that life is happening to us rather than for us. We always feel like we have to be the ones that have to fix everything. We have to be the ones that we are the go-getters. We are the ones that people rely on, like they'll take care of it. And we fill this role, and such a hard role to get out of, because people then expect you to be the one that takes care of it. And so to get out of that, it causes a lot of turmoil in that. And so you feel like that constant pressure of like, I'm the one who has to do all this. There's no one else who's going to do this. Again, that's those subtle things that we can, like, I mean, I lived like that for years, didn't even realize like how much all this was accumulating to me, just putting myself last. And unfortunately, as women, we think we can do it all. And we do manage to do it all. And we put on a good front and everything is happy and we look like we're keeping it all together. But only behind closed doors the cost of that. And that's what only I knew for years, of like, there's so much that goes into this. And the tears behind closed doors, the anguish, the yearning for like, I want more in life. There's got to be more to this than just feeling like I'm exhausted all the time. And so those are all those little signs. And if it's like resonating with anyone who's listening to this, those are your signs. Like, don't wait until it gets further. Don't wait until it becomes a physical ailment. Or don't wait until you are completely exhausted. Like, those are your signs. It's time to change what you're doing.
And do you find that this happens a lot more to women than to men?
Yeah, I find that, I mean, I'm biased because my clientele is mostly women. So, but I do find that women, I don't know if it's a societal thing, but we tend to take it all on. Like, the kids can become, okay, we need to take care of the kids. We need to do this. And we are much more able to overextend ourselves. I find that we're not only taking on the full role of working, but we're also taking on the full role of childcare. We're taking on the full role of the house. And not to say that the men in our lives aren't helping, but it becomes almost like, this is my role, and oh, thank you for the help. And
It's
so,
exactly like that. Yes, of
yeah.
course. Yeah.
So it's like, even if you are receiving help from your significant other, you internalize that as your burden fully.
Yeah. And you almost feel guilty, like, oh my God, my husband, put the dishes in the dishwasher. Like, what kind of wife am I? And it's true, like, especially if you have like those traditional roles, you feel guilty.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then that all goes into it, because you're like, damned if you do, damned if you don't, like you're either taking on the burden or you're feeling the guilt of it. So sometimes you're just to do it, then feel that guilt.
Right. What you're describing, in many ways, like self-abandonment is burnout. I mean, it does lead to burnout, correct? Yeah. So you're really describing burnout in women. And I think that you're very wise to point out that we're so conditioned to be in that role that we enter into it and we slide into it without even being consciously aware of what we're doing. And we're constantly running on that hamster wheel of, I just gotta do it better. I'm not doing it well enough. I just gotta do it better. And so when you were growing up, was that something you also saw in the female members of your family? Was there a role modeling that went on for you?
Yeah. So through my own healing journey, I'm still unraveling a lot of things from like my, child wounds, or, just like my inner child. I'm still learning more about myself, but in that insight, yes, absolutely. So hard work was number one. Like, you have to work hard. If you want a good life, you got to work hard. And like, I'm totally game for that, but there's also has to be a balance, but that wasn't expressed. And so that was part of it, that self-sacrifice of like, I will just take care of everything. I will silence myself so the other people are happy. I don't need to say anything. I'll appease other people, avoid the conflict. This was all modeled for me. And I lived my life thinking that was the way that it had to be. Like, my opinions don't matter, my needs don't matter, my voice doesn't matter. I just will keep myself silent, keep myself small, because if everybody else is happy, then I can be happy. Like, if everything's in peace, then like, okay, then I'm okay. And that's what I thought subconsciously. But I realize now, like, that I was never going to be okay, by making everybody outside of myself a priority and never making myself a priority.
And do you think that it also had, when you were growing up, when you were still a child, that it had an impact on you? Because if you saw, say, your mother, behaving like a martyr, basically, bless your mother, I'm sure she was a lovely person, but children pick up on the stress of their parents, especially female children. So when you saw her sacrificing herself like that, did that make you happy, or do you remember how that made you feel?
It's interesting because I like look back and like I would say I had a good childhood, like I had a very good childhood, but like for me, it's like it's almost like a blur. I don't know. I feel like I have a really hard time connecting with certain things. Like, I'll have those moments pop up, but as a whole, I'm just like, I have a really hard time connecting with those emotions. And I think for so long, part of what it is that I've disconnected from my own emotions, that to bring myself back to that place of like, how was I emotionally there? It feels so foreign. So for me, a lot of my journey has been connecting with my own emotions, because I think I was so in tune to everybody else's emotions. And as long as everybody is okay, then I'm okay. As a child, I'm trying to really connect with like, what did I feel? And like, I can pick out little moments. Like, I think for me, as a child, I was very, very self-critical. I mean, I found things I've written even when I was like 8 years old, like talking poorly about myself. So I don't know, like, that's like, and I don't know if like there's somewhere that came along, because I know that's not natural for kids just to think so poorly about themselves, but I was extra critical of myself. And so that's the only thing I really remember, and just feeling like kind of alone in that. And that really did carry out until I started doing a deep dive into myself, in my adult years. But I lived with that for so long, that self-critical, never good enough feeling for so long.
So you're definitely a type A personality, right?
100%, yes.
Type A overachiever. And I'm sure you see this in most women that fall into this category are guilty of this.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's the difference, because it's like, it's good to be an achiever. You want to accomplish things in your life. It's good to have that drive in your life. But then it's like, what's the driving force? Is it for the worth, or is it for like, I'm gonna serve the world in a bigger way? And that really became where, like, I had to really ask myself, like, why am I pushing myself this hard? And for me, for years, it was like, if I accomplish this, then I am worthy. And that became the trap for me. Versus, like, it's great to accomplish things and be a high achiever if you're like, okay, this lights me up. I feel lifted. I feel energized. Like, that's totally fine. So I think sometimes we get lost in like the behavior. It's not always the behavior, because high achievement is great. It's good to be an achiever, but it's the deeper why behind it. And if it's attached to your worth, that's where it becomes that trap.
And also the euphoria that you feel doesn't last. Like, it's a short
100%.
burst of happiness, and then you're searching for the next thrill and the next accomplishment, and you never really feel like you fulfilled what you need to do. I can really relate.
That's an excellent point, Lynn.
Yeah.
It's like an addiction. It really is.
It is. Yeah, absolutely. It can be an addiction.
Your next hit. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. And it's like, you constantly get to that place where you think you're going to feel what you want to feel. And you're like, oh, that fell flat. Like, and that's after working for maybe, years on something. And you're like, oh, it's such a letdown. Like, I thought I was going to feel differently. Okay, well, I guess that's the wrong path. Let me spend another 5 more years working for the next big goal.
It's true. I totally get it. And it's usually why you're doing it. That's the excitement. And then, when it's achieved, then it's like, well, that was it. Like, I worked for this. I know. I totally can relate to this. Dr. Kelly, what do you think this is doing to our nervous system? This self-abandonment issues that we get it wrapped up in. What's going on with our nervous system at this time?
So what it's doing to so many of us, and myself included, and this is why I experienced chronic back pain. I truly believe this was linked to my chronic back pain by being that overachiever, and that are what we think and feeling like I feel like I'm not enough, being self-critical, constantly going, hyperdrive. You're always just going. You get stuck into the stress response. It's that sympathetic nervous system response. So our systems are literally in like a survival mode. And when we are in survival mode, we are hypervigilant, we're alert, we are not healing. Our bodies will not heal in that mode because it's primed for survival. Our muscles tense, our fascia, which is our connective tissue, tenses, our immune system drops off, our heart rates increase, breathing rate increases. And this goes on, if we're living like this for years, can literally go on for years. And if we never bring ourselves back into a more regulated state, that's when we start to see these health impacts happening. And for me, it presented as chronic back pain, because I literally was living in this state, and no matter what I did, it would not release. And I was in my mid to late 20s with chronic back pain. And the minute I started releasing some of these things, I don't live with chronic back pain anymore. So that's how it presented for me. Yeah. And that's why I'm such a huge believer in the power of this, that mind-body connection, because it all is linked by our emotions. So if our emotions are feeling guilt, shame, fear, and we're stuck in these places, that scarcity of life, then we're just staying in these states of survival. Unfortunately, when it becomes even more prolonged, when we see people who have like autoimmune disorders, they have reproductive issues, there's a lot of other secondary consequences, skin health. I mean, you can go on for days of all the impacts of living in survival mode, but that's truly what it is. Because think about the person who is self-abandoning. They're not taking time to rest. They're not taking time to rejuvenate themselves. They're never really in that parasympathetic response. And then when they go to sleep and they have maybe that opportunity to finally relax, many of them, experience myself included, have difficulty getting to sleep or falling asleep or ever getting into a deep sleep. And then, you're up early because you're like, I got to get all this done because the kids are going to be awake, or I have all this other stuff. So you're constantly going. And our bodies were designed in primitive ways. Like if there was a lion, you would deal with the lion, run, fight it, freeze, play dead, whatever it is. And then the lion would go away and we could rest. But now our stress is the phone in front of our faces, the news, the bills, people telling you everything bad that's happening in the world. And so you're never able to actually relax. And so this chronicity of it is where we're seeing the link between self-abandonment and health impacts.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. We're constantly overstimulated by everything. It's just overload of information, emotions, everything. It's just constant noise for your mind. I totally get this.
Absolutely.
So I'm just curious, Kelly, that when you were in the midst of all of this, were you aware of stories that you were telling yourself about why you had to stay in that state, why you had to keep working hard? Like what was going on in your subconscious that was keeping you stuck in this pattern?
When I was in the middle of it, I had no awareness of this because this is how I live. Doesn't everybody feel like this? Like I literally felt like everybody's mind worked the same as mine. Like I had no awareness of my stories. But as I became aware, that's when I started to see the stories that I was holding on to, that I'm not enough. And so I'm going to figure out a way to feel enough. And so I would do all this. The stories where that I don't matter, my voice doesn't matter, that as long as everybody's happy, then I should be happy. That was another story I would tell myself. Another story is that you just have to keep working hard. You just keep going. Like hard work is the way to happiness. So I just felt like, okay, I'm just going to keep working hard. Eventually I'll find happiness, right? Like, I mean, I'll just keep doing this. I'll feel some joy in my life. Didn't happen. And again, that story of like self-sacrifice, like it's noble to sacrifice yourself. That's praise. Like the more I put myself out there, I'll be the one that takes the hit. I'll be the one who does it. Like that's just a noble cause. Like I should feel good about that. And so all these stories were just constantly playing in my mind. And even to this day, I have to be constantly aware of these because they're still there and I'll have to check them because I'll get into some of those old habits and I'm like, okay, well, why am I doing this? Like, why am I continuing to do these behaviors? And then like I have to go back to the stories. So I'm still working through some of these stories. But the awareness was the game changer that I'm like, oh my gosh, that's not true. Like I lived my whole life thinking this is gospel. And when I realized that that's not true and I don't have to live with that story anymore, that was the most liberating thing in my life. And it gave me a whole new path of seeing life differently.
Oh, that's amazing. So yeah, I think always awareness is key. You know, for running on a program that's in the background, in the subconscious, we could be run by that forever, and we can't release ourselves, even if we thought we should or could. We can't release ourselves until we really get off the hamster wheel and really look at what's running us, right? So I think that's really amazing. So tell us a little bit then, when you are dealing with clients who have this issue, like how do you get them to, become aware of their, subconscious beliefs, and how do you help them release from those?
Yeah, absolutely. So I always love to just first work through the body because I find that so many of my clients are such in a, like I was saying, that survival mode that to them present something where they had to process that cognitively, they get stuck, they get trapped in that. So I always start everything out with the body, breathing. I do some just pandiculation. So I'll like do some contraction and then relaxation with the breathing. So that helps the nervous system just release some of the muscle tension. And our bodies have that reciprocal relationship between the mind and the body. So when our body says, no, we're safe, like opening up, then our mind can say, oh, I'm safe. I'm safe to receive different messages. So I always start with the body to teach the mind that it's safe enough to receive something differently. But one thing I always love to start with is values, because this was such a big game changer for me and living my life by my values, because it's not something that just is fleeting and changing. It can change, but usually they're more solidified. So I always start with the awareness of your values, like what's meaningful to you. And so some of mine are like peace, autonomy, integrity. So those are some that I live by. And so bringing that into my clients to start out is like, okay, here are your values that you're recognizing. Like, did your daily actions match those? Like, if your value is peace, are your behaviors showing you that, yes, I value peace? And a lot of times, unfortunately, they don't, because we're, maybe again, that people pleasing, or just trying to keep somebody happy, or trying to explain ourselves to somebody. And so we're just constantly sacrificing our peace. So that's usually a big wake up call when you said your values, but then your behaviors don't match. So there becomes that disconnect between what you're doing and what you desire in life. And then we dive a little bit deeper of like, what's the reasoning behind that? Like, do you know that story? What do you find that, what's the cause of that? And so getting into some of those stories of why they may be doing that. And sometimes it's really hard to really uncover those initially, especially because we've lived with those for so long. So I really like to just have them kind of check the behavior first, and then start to question that behavior when they see the discrepancy between their values and what they're doing. And usually then they can start to kind of scrape the surface of what the reasoning behind that is. And we start there.
Is it a long process to recovery for changing lifestyle and patterns and everything? Does it take a while for most people, do you find?
I think it depends. I think it depends on your willingness. So it depends on what you are willing to do, and your consistency, and what you're no longer willing to accept in your life. Like, I find that unfortunately a lot of people don't come to see me until they're at that point, kind of where I was years ago. And so at that point they're like, I will do whatever. I am sick of living like this. So at that point, I find they tend to move a little bit quicker, because they are so done with living the way they've been living that they're willing to move with curiosity. And really it's that curiosity that allows for that growth. So I find those people that are just willing to take the next step, are willing to move into some of those places of discomfort, are willing to invest in themselves, make themselves a non-negotiable, because they're so sick of living the way they've been living, tend to do much better. Sometimes I'll have someone who's not willing to let go of that old way, because it's safe. We've lived like that forever. It's familiar, it's comfortable, so it's very safe for them. And so they'll kind of keep gravitating back. And sometimes it's a longer process with that, because they're not at that point where they're willing to make those changes yet.
The other part of this, like, yes, I can see that people, when they're hitting rock bottom, they are ready. They'll do anything to release themselves from the pain of it. And so they're releasing themselves. And then how do you help them deal with the reactions from the people around them to them changing? Because, that's another big piece of this.
Yeah, I can see that being a problem afterwards.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And that's such a great question, because that was something in my journey that I was not prepared for. Because as I started elevating my energy, I started changing my ways, started living more authentically, speaking my piece, my life, I will be very honest, it started unraveling. Those relationships unraveled significantly, and I'm still living with some of that unraveling. And it's very, very challenging. And so for me, it's a lived experience I can share with them of these are some of the things that help me. And I found that through living more authentically, speaking my piece, there's just such an empowerment I have in myself of this is who I am. I can anchor down into that. And I find if they can experience that and feel what does it feel like to literally be free to be you? It's you start loving yourself so much, you start feeling so worthy of your own time and energy, that those relationships, you can see them almost more clearly of wow, they didn't value my worth. And I always use this example because this was something that was really meaningful to me in my journey, and so many people that I help, in that it's like a bank account. If you invest in your bank account every day, you keep putting money in, putting money in, putting money in, and then somebody comes and they want to make a big withdrawal from your bank account, you'd be like, absolutely not. I have been investing in this every single day. You're not taking that away. And I find that when we do that with our own love for ourselves, our own worth, we invest in that every day. You do non-negotiable actions. Every single day you're doing something for yourself. You're showing up for yourself. You're doing the hard work. All of a sudden, you are just not as tolerant of those people that are in your life, of the ones who just don't want the best for you. And so I find it kind of almost naturally progresses in a way that, unfortunately, those relationships change. But if you are so anchored in your own care and your own love for yourself, and you make yourself a non-negotiable, you just don't have the tolerance for it anymore to allow that in your life anymore.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, it's a hard transition, but then once you find yourself and you're happy and comfortable with yourself, all of those things don't matter. And you also, I'm sure, when you're that giving of yourself, you have a lot of people around you that will just take full
advantage. Yeah.
full advantage of the situation, and it's expected of you. And once you stop, then you're the most horrible person in the world, right?
100%. That's it. And something that's helped me through that too is like, I think I read this somewhere too. It's like, you have to create the space for the new people that are going to love you.
Yeah.
So in order to do that, some of the people that maybe have been around, I mean, I've had very, very close people not join me in the journey. And you know what? Like, that's their choice. And for me, it became like boundaries were a foreign thing that became very like, I have these boundaries. And when I realized that it's an invitation, excuse me, it's an invitation into your life. Here's my journey. This is where I'm going. If you want to come along the journey, you want to do your own, you're welcome to come. If you choose not to do that, I'm sorry. I'm going to continue on my journey, and I'm going to meet people who are willing to do that. And so for me, that's been a big sense of peace, and that like, I'm not cutting people out of my life. They were invited, and I don't make their choices. I make my choices. And so they chose not to come along the journey with me. You know, maybe at some point they come along, but at this point, I'm not staying here anymore.
I admire you so much because it takes tremendous strength to actually do that, right, Lucille?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're exactly the right person to be helping other women through this, because you've taken on the mission, and you've worked it through yourself to the point where you're very anchored in this. And you're very, very strong. So yeah, I like Lynn, I really admire the work that you've done on yourself. It's not easy. Too many people would balk at this and just, be too afraid, and they'd turn back. Right?
Yeah.
It's not easy. Yeah. And I never want to downplay the complexity sometimes of this. It's like, it's not an uphill journey that you're just everything, or, it's just like a roller coaster. It's very challenging. I mean, there are some days I truly struggle because of a lot of those lost relationships, and it's very challenging. And there's a lot of grief in this. Grief in the loss of not only relationships outside yourself, but there's grief within yourself, that you're grieving a past version of yourself. You're grieving the version of yourself who didn't show up for yourself for maybe 10, 20, 30 years. You're grieving the time that's lost. You're grieving all the goals that maybe you sacrificed in the process. You're grieving all the joy you could have felt. So there's a lot of grief in this process. And I think if we can be aware of that and know that when we feel that grief, it doesn't mean that we're on the wrong path. It's just part of the process. And that it's actually showing that you are on the right path, because if it feels comfortable, you're not changing. You have to feel some of that turmoil to know that something's changing, something's opening up, and here we are. We're moving on to the next version of ourselves.
Right. And it takes a lot of self-forgiveness, doesn't it? You have to, you can look back on all the mistakes you made, all the ways you abandoned yourself and violated yourself. And, and sometimes we can be very punitive about that, but really your healing will depend on you being forgiving and compassionate towards yourself, which I so resonate with your journey, because my tendency would always be to see, oh, that's where you violated myself. That's where I didn't, honor my values, blah, blah, blah. How stupid of me to do that. How horrible. And then I'd have to always pull myself back, say, wait a minute, you didn't know what you didn't know, right? And you weren't raised, you weren't supported to do it any. So there is no point in being punitive. You just got to forgive and move on.
As women, we are just always so hard on ourselves.
We're very hard, yeah.
I mean, guys are not beating themselves up as much as we are, not nearly as much, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
Well, that's a good point, Lynn. And speaking of the guys, like, how was this in terms of your marriage? Like, how did your husband react to all of this?
Yeah, I cannot say enough. I have an amazing husband, and he has just been so incredibly supportive, been my corner throughout everything. Have a he's growing himself, so he is open to growth, and I think that's the
Wow.
big thing, that we are both not only open, but we are always wanting to grow and change, and so he is in that boat too, and so he recognizes the importance of doing the steps towards growth and healing. And I think and not only recognizes it, but he supports it, because he likes this version of me better than the version that I was. I would say the past version of myself, I was unforgiving of not only myself, but of him too. So even just little things, I would like stick it to him over and over and over again. And like there are a lot of things, like the way I behaved back then, like I always focused on the negative. He could do 1,000 things right, and I would focus on the negative. So like it's actually helped our marriage, because I've become a better version of myself. And like I just I feel like a different light in me than when I did years ago. And so I think we've just worked really good together as a team. I think for his life, he's had to set some boundaries too. And so I think we've helped each other through this, of realizing that like we're worthy of it. It's funny because like he's very similar to me, and like he was much more like a self-sacrificing person too. So we've grown in both our journeys and grown together through it.
That's
That's
like the ultimate secret to a long and happy marriage, is to grow together. Grow
Yes.
together in the same direction. And yeah, that's amazing.
Yep.
I love that.
I know. I always say, I'm like, how thankful. I didn't know when I married at that time, but how thankful I was that I had somebody who was receptive to and open to growing. I'm so
Yeah.
grateful. Mhm.
And that must make it easier too when you're raising. You've got two boys, right?
Mhm.
And so that must make it easier to kind of give them the role model that women aren't there to be self-sacrificing, that moms are, they need to take time to themselves, they need to play, they need to relax, and so that they don't grow up to be in that traditional mindset that the woman is there to just do everything and she's not going to complain, and that's the way things should go. So I think you've set up your sons, haven't you, for a really healthy, happy relationships with women who are not going to be self-abandoning, right?
That's it. Yeah. And I think it's hard as a mom sometimes, because we think like, oh, I always have to put the kids first. Like, but really it's leading by example. Like they see me doing my self-care. Like they're downstairs right now. They know I'm doing a podcast right now, and they're like, they'll ask about it, So it's like, they see me like pursuing my dream. And it's like, that is, for me, like that's leading by example. And that's something that they can take and go off with. It's like it's hard to say to your kid, like, take care of yourself, go after what you want to, do what you want to do with your life. And then meanwhile, you're not, they see that. So they're going to question that. Like, well, you're telling me to, but you don't ever take care of yourself. So why am I supposed to? So it's like, for me, I view it, it's released me too as a mom. It's like, it releases you from that maybe guilt of like feeling like you shouldn't take care of yourself, because like by taking care of yourself, you are taking care of your children. Like me being in a more regulated state, I have more tolerance for things and like, less reactionary with them. I include them. I do breath work with them. I do visualization with them before bed. Like I make it, my husband and I does too. Like we make it part of our family routine, because like these are skills I didn't learn until my 30s. And I so would have been in a better place if I had these skills when I was a child. So they're starting out much more ahead than I was at this point.
That's wonderful. What a great example you are to them. That's how every family should be, honestly.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
So, Dr. Kelly, if somebody wanted to reach out to you and do a consultation with you, where can they find you? Do you do online consultations, or is it more in person? How can you help some of our audience?
Yeah, so I'm all online. So best place to find me is on my website. It's optimalu, YOU, healthandwellness.com, or you can connect with me at Dr. Kelly Kessler on all social media.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for coming on our podcast. We enjoyed this tremendously, and we learned a lot. I've never even heard of this, self-abandonment. I've never heard this term before, but it makes so much sense. And thank you so much for sharing your personal journey with us. I mean, very insightful and touching, and you're an incredibly brave, strong woman. Well done, honestly.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much. I'm so grateful for you both having me here today.
Oh, well, we've loved it, and you've provided us with, and our listeners with, so many gems to reflect on. I think this will help wake a lot of women up to how they're living their lives. So thank you very much for all that you've shared with us today. We appreciate it.
Thank you so
Absolutely.
much. Thank you, Dr.
Thank
Kelly.
you.
Thank you.
Please be aware that Lynn and I are here to provide insights, advice, stories that are for educational and entertainment purposes only. None of our content should be considered to be personal, medical, or mental health therapy. If you are experiencing a mental health or physical health challenge, please consult the appropriate healthcare specialist. We are here to provide the best possible content in an atmosphere of positive conversation and personal growth.